Every year feels shorter than the one before it. Most people think that's because life gets busier as you get older. But that's not what the research says. In fact, your sense of time may be speeding up for a much stranger reason. Your brain isn't measuring time the way you think it is. It's measuring memories. And if that's true, then the reason your childhood felt endless might also explain why entire years now seem to disappear almost overnight. For most of human history, nobody talked about this. People noticed it, of course. A child and an old person could look at the same year and experience it completely differently. But they had no way to explain why. The clock moved at the same speed for everyone. The Earth completed the same orbit. The seasons arrived exactly when they were supposed to. Nothing about time itself appeared to change. And yet something clearly did. A summer vacation at age 10 could feel almost infinite. A single school year felt long enough to contain multiple lifetimes. Now think about last year. Not the major events. The ordinary days. The random Tuesdays. The quiet weekends. For many adults, those months seem compressed together into something strangely small. As if the year happened, but never fully arrived. Most people assume the explanation is simple. They say life gets routine. Responsibilities increase. Days become similar. And while that isn't wrong, it isn't the whole story either. Because psychologists began noticing something unusual decades ago. The speed of subjective time doesn't change gradually. It changes predictably. Again and again, researchers found the same pattern. Children consistently report time moving slowly. Older adults consistently report time moving quickly. The effect appears across cultures, across countries, across generations. Something deeper than modern lifestyle seems to be happening, which raises a strange possibility. What if the feeling that time is accelerating isn't actually about time at all? What if it's about how your brain records reality? To understand this, we need to talk about memory, because memory and time are far more connected than they appear. Imagine 2 weeks of your life. In the first week, nothing unusual happens. You wake up, go to school or work, come home, eat, sleep, repeat. The second week is completely different. You travel somewhere new, meet new people, learn unfamiliar things. Experience situations you've never encountered before. At the end of both weeks, 7 days have passed. But when you look back on them months later, they rarely feel equal. The routine week often collapses into a blur. The unusual week remains vivid. It feels larger, longer, more substantial. And that observation led neuroscientists toward an important clue. Your brain doesn't experience life continuously. It compresses information. Every second of your existence contains far more sensory input than your brain can store. So it filters. It simplifies. It keeps what appears important and discards much of the rest. The more familiar an experience becomes, the less attention your brain gives it. And the less attention it receives, the fewer memory markers it leaves behind. Researchers sometimes describe this as the difference between recording and compression. When something is new, your brain records extensively. When something is familiar, your brain saves space. It assumes it has already learned what it needs to know. This is one reason childhood feels so different. Almost everything is new. Your first classroom, your first friend, your first bicycle, your first major disappointment, your first success. The world is packed with experiences your brain has never encountered before. And because everything is unfamiliar, everything demands attention. Your brain records constantly. It builds enormous numbers of memory markers. Years later, when you look back, those markers create the impression of a vast stretch of time. But adulthood often works differently. You know how to navigate your environment. You know your routines. You know what tomorrow will probably look like. The world becomes more predictable, and predictability changes the way memory is stored. The days still happen. Your brain simply stops treating many of them as significant enough to archive in detail. But memory density is only part of the story. There's another explanation that has fascinated psychologists for decades. It's called proportional time theory. The idea is surprisingly simple. When you're 5 years old, 1 year represents 20% of your entire life. When you're 50 years old, 1 year represents only 2%. Objectively, the year is identical. Subjectively, it occupies a very different place inside your experience. A single summer at age 8 can feel enormous because it represents a substantial fraction of everything you've ever known. At age 40, That same duration is tiny compared to the total length of your lived experience. Some researchers believe your brain unconsciously compares new stretches of time against all previous stretches as your life grows larger. Each individual year occupies less psychological territory. The effect is difficult to measure directly, but it aligns remarkably well with how people describe their lives. Children often feel as though adulthood is unimaginably distant. Adults often feel as though childhood happened yesterday. The clock never changes, perspective does. And then there's a third layer. Neuroscientists studying memory formation found that new experiences activate systems in the brain associated with attention and learning. Novel environments generate stronger encoding. They produce richer memories. They leave deeper traces behind. This means novelty does something unusual. It doesn't just make life more interesting. It makes life feel longer. Not necessarily in the moment. In retrospect. Think about a vacation. Many vacations seem to pass quickly while they're happening, but when you look back on them months later, they feel surprisingly large. They contain so many distinct memories that your brain interprets them as longer periods of time. Routine often creates the opposite effect. Days feel normal while you're living them, but later, they collapse into a handful of vague impressions. A month of repetition can shrink into what feels like a few memories, and this leads to an uncomfortable realization. The feeling that life is speeding up may not mean you're losing time. It may mean you're creating fewer memorable distinctions between one day and the next. The calendar isn't accelerating. Your memories are compressing. But there is something even deeper hiding beneath all of this. Because time isn't merely a physical measurement, it's also a psychological construction. Your experience of the present is built by a brain that evolved to help you survive, not to help you measure reality perfectly. What matters to the brain is usefulness, prediction, adaptation, efficiency. If familiar experiences can be processed automatically, they will be. That efficiency helps you function, but it comes with a side effect. The more automated life becomes, the less conscious attention many moments receive, and attention is the raw material from which memories are made. This is why major life transitions often seem unusually long. Moving to a new city, starting a new school, learning a new skill, falling in love, recovering from loss. These periods demand attention. Your brain can't rely entirely on prediction. It must observe, learn, adjust. And in doing so, it creates dense memory landscapes. The result is a period of life that feels larger than the calendar says it should, which brings us to a strange conclusion. Many people spend years trying to save time. They search for efficiency, optimization, faster routes, quicker systems, more automation, and sometimes those things are useful. But if your goal is to make life feel richer, the brain appears to care about something else entirely. Difference, surprise, exploration, attention. The moments that stay with you are rarely the most efficient ones. They're the ones that forced your brain to wake up and notice. The ones that interrupted the script. The ones that made prediction impossible. And maybe that's why childhood feels so vast in memory. Not because children possess more time than adults, but because they are encountering reality for the first time. Everything is unexpected. Everything is worth noticing. Everything leaves a mark. The strange thing is that this ability never completely disappears. Adults can still create novelty, still learn, still explore, still place themselves in situations that demand attention. The brain remains capable of building new landscapes of memory long after childhood ends. Which means the feeling that time is speeding up may not be entirely outside your control. Not because you can slow the clock. You can't. But because you can influence what the clock leaves behind. In the end, the question isn't why years get shorter. The years don't. The Earth continues its orbit exactly as it always has. The clocks continue ticking exactly as they always have. What's changing is the map your brain creates of those years. And when that map becomes sparse, life can seem to vanish faster than it actually does. Maybe that's the real lesson hidden inside the mystery. Time isn't just something that passes, it's something that gets remembered. And the difference between those two things may explain why one summer of childhood can feel